the fortress of Inab, northern Syria, the 28th of June 1149. At dawn on the plains before the walls of Inab, the combined forces of the Principality of Antioch and the assassins of the Nizari find themselves completely surrounded by the Seljuk army, led by the formidable Muslim leader Nur ad-Din. Caught completely off guard, Prince Raymond gathers his unprepared force to break through the enemy encirclement as fast as possible. Fighting for their lives with outstanding ferocity, the ruler of Antioch would have to bear the consequences of his actions during the Second Crusade. All these factors resulted in the Battle of Inab, a battle that would change the history of the Crusades forever. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. When we last left off, King Louis of France was on his way home after a failed expedition in the Holy Land. He intended to set sail to Norman Italy with the help of the Sicilian fleet, after which he planned to use the Italian peninsula as a land route to his homeland. However, Louis's travel plans proved to be quite risky. The conflict between King Roger II of Sicily and the Byzantine Emperor Manuel still raged on the Aegean and Adriatic seas. As the French king was relying on Norman assistance, he was exposing himself to potential Byzantine attacks. It did not take long before the Franco-Norman fleet was spotted by the Byzantine fleet that was anchored near Cape Malleus. The Byzantine warships moved quickly, easily boarding the slow-moving transport ships. In the midst of the attack, King Louis managed to escape with his ship to Calabria, leaving his wife and his household to be captured by the Byzantines. Queen Eleanor was transferred to Constantinople as a hostage, but was rescued by the Norman fleet that operated on the Aegean Sea. The French queen eventually reached the Kingdom of Sicily and reunited with her husband in Basilicata. The French royal couple met King Roger II of Sicily with great enthusiasm. Feasting in Potenza, Louis confirmed Roger's royal title as King of Sicily, discussing a common anti-Greek alliance, and expressing willingness to launch another crusade, this time jointly attacking Constantinople itself. Leaving Sicily, the couple stayed in Rome, where they met with Pope Eugenius and tried to persuade him to launch another crusade. Although initially eager for the next crusade, the Pope's enthusiasm was dimmed when he noticed the disunity between Louis and Eleanor. After some failed attempts to reconcile the couple, the Pope gave up on the idea, resulting in his abandonment of the project and confirmation of the Great Royal Divorce of 1152. Another authority figure humiliated by the outcome of the crusade was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who, together with King Louis, blamed the Greeks for the crusade's defeat. Saint Bernard attempted to aid the French ruler in calling for another crusade. However, his efforts were ultimately fruitless. The European elite was simply too disappointed and exhausted from the failure of such an enormous undertaking, and they were distrustful of the Byzantines and Eastern Franks. Moreover, the German king was allied with the Byzantines and opposed this idea, even threatening war with France to prevent its follow-through. Thus, the potential next campaign in the Holy Land had died down, solidifying the Second Crusade in the Levant as a failed endeavour, which had resulted in deteriorating relations between Catholic Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and the Crusader states. The true winners of the Second Crusade in Syria were the Zengids, especially Nur ad-Din. The departure of Louis VII and Conrad III marked a major power shift in the Levant, leaving the growing Zengid power unchallenged. However, much to Nur ad-Din's surprise, the first opportunity to strike did not come from his actions, but one of the Latin Franks in the Outremer. As King Louis departed from the Holy Land, a civil war broke out in the county of Tripoli. One of King Louis's vassals, by the name of Bertrand, still blamed Count Raymond for the death of his father, Alfonso Jourdan. While pretending to return home, Bertrand postponed his departure, buying himself enough time to gather supporters from the French king's returning host. In August 1148, Bertrand launched a surprise attack on the Tripolitan garrison at Arima, seizing the castle and threatening Tripoli directly. Shocked by this turn of events, Raymond asked his neighbours for help, but due to the failure at Damascus, the Latin elite was not eager to assist him. In desperation, the Tripolitan Count asked Nur ad-Din for assistance. Much to everybody's surprise, the Lord of Aleppo agreed. Marching from his city, Nur ad-Din met with his Damascene ally Nur at Baalbek, after which they jointly besieged and burned Arima. Bertram and his family were taken prisoner and carted to Aleppo, where they spent 12 years in captivity. Nur ad-Din's triumph in Tripoli helped him realize that the remaining Crusader states were practically defenseless without the support of Jerusalem or the kingdoms of Europe. This meant that there was practically no one to save the Latin states, which was why Nur ad-Din decided to embark on a rampage across the northern Outremer. The only person capable of confronting Nur ad-Din's advance was the Prince of Antioch, Raymond of Poitiers. Having received no aid from crusading monarchs and Jerusalem, Raymond was left on his own. The only help the Antiochian prince could find came from the famous Nizari assassins, who, after being exiled from Damascus, had found shelter in the fortress of Masyaf. Their leader, Ali ibn Wafa, was aware of Nur ad-Din's expansion. As the leader of a militant sect of Shia Islam, he decided to fight against the Sunni Islam leader by allying himself with Raymond. However, even with the support of the valiant assassins, Raymond's forces were meagre when compared to Nur ad-Din's alliance with Damascus and the Seljuks of Anatolia. The first blow against Antioch came not from Nur ad-Din himself, but from his Anatolian allies. Sensing the weakness of the Latins, Sultan Masud of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum signed a truce with the Byzantines, with the aim of seizing the Antiochian town of Marash, for which he asked Nur ad-Din to create a diversion. Using this as an excuse, the Emir of Aleppo invaded the territory of Antioch, planning to block Raymond from relieving the Seljuk siege of Marash. However, it was Raymond who took the initiative, attacking the unprepared Nur ad-Din at Famia in a skirmish that pushed him from the principality. However, Raymond's luck did not last long. The Lord of Aleppo regrouped his forces and attacked Raymond once again, forcing him back in a skirmish at Bagres. Raymond was forced to withdraw. Subsequently, Nur ad-Din decided to besiege the key fortress of Inab, which guarded the southern principality's border. Nur ad-Din's expedition consisted of 6,000 horsemen and yet more Aleppo militia. In contrast, Raymond and the assassins possessed 4,000 horsemen and 1,000 infantrymen. They decided to relieve the fortress and combined their soldiers with the local garrison to become a defense force that outnumbered Nur ad-Din. Not expecting Raymond's return, and informed about the numerical superiority of his foes, Nur ad-Din decided to lift the siege and move east of the Orontes. Thinking that Nur ad-Din would try to take Inab again, Raymond ordered much of his contingent to remain in the fortress, leaving his more agile force to respond to the Seljuk attacks. The Nizari leader, Ali ibn Wafa, tried to warn Raymond about the perils of splitting up their combined force, but to no avail. The Emir of Aleppo quickly realized that he once more outnumbered the Antiochians and devised a plan to isolate Raymond's force from any potential strongpoints. Contrary to his opponent's movements, Raymond of Poitiers was unaware of the Seljuk army's return and decided to build a camp for the night on an open plain, also known as the Fountain of Mured. Utilizing the element of surprise and terrain, Nur ad-Din managed to surround the Christian camp. At dawn on the 28th of June 1149, Raymond found himself surrounded. He assembled his unprepared force to break through the enemy encirclement as fast as possible. Fighting for their lives with outstanding ferocity, the initial Frankish and Nizari charge made the impression that a breakthrough was possible. It was then that disaster struck. The dust clouds churned up by the field of fighting men had significantly slowed the Antiochian advance, allowing for Nur ad-Din's Seljuk horsemen to attack Raymond's army from all sides. A desperate melee ensued, during which Raymond and Ali ibn Wafa fell in battle alongside the rest of their force, with only a handful managing to break through enemy lines. The Battle of Inab proved to be a disaster for the Franks in Syria. Though often compared to the Battle of Agère-Saint-Gueny that took place 30 years ago, it had much more dire consequences. Unlike El-Ghazi, Nur ad-Din fully exploited his victory, capturing all of the Principality of Antioch's lands east of the Amanus mountain range, pushing the Principality's influence into the coastal regions. The events that took place at Inab had sent shockwaves across the Principality of Antioch, as well as other Crusader states. Raymond's heir, Bohemond III, was only 5 years old, and not ready to replace his late father as ruler of the realm. The panic in the city rose to such levels that, in an attempt to buy more time in exchange for a truce, the city's patriarch, Imari, even promised Nur ad-Din the surrender of Antioch if no help would arrive. Luckily for the Franks in Syria, King Baldwin III of Jerusalem managed to intervene in early 1150, becoming the guardian of young Bohemond III until he came of age. However, unlike when Baldwin le Beau had saved Antioch in 1119 with the full might of Jerusalem's army, the king could only arrive with a small force, with an additional contingent of the Templar Knights. Although Baldwin III took action to preserve Antioch, he couldn't risk major campaigning without exposing Jerusalem for a longer period. This essentially marked the giving up of Antioch's territory in northern Syria forever, turning the Principality of Antioch from a Frankish bastion in northern Syria to a minor power in the Outremer. If this ignominious outcome was to be the Principality of Antioch's fate, then its counterpart of the county of Edessa would be worse. While on his way to seek help from Baldwin to the west, Count Jocelyn II of Edessa was captured by Nur ad-Din's men. He was put in captivity in Aleppo, where he died 9 years later. Preying on Tebessel's easy capture after de Courtenay's detainment, Nur ad-Din attempted to storm the city, but Jocelyn's wife, Countess Beatrice, rallied the Frankish and Armenian populace to defend its walls. Despite this success, Beatrice deemed the territory impossible to defend without a proper army. Surrounded by Seljuks, the Countess opened diplomatic overtures with the Byzantine Emperor Manuel, proposing to sell the territory to the Byzantines. Manuel was always seeking to regain Roman territory in Anatolia, so he agreed, sending his governor to Cilicia to pay Beatrice for the fortress. All the while, the Countess planned to leave Tebessel and seek shelter in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, together with her son Jocelyn III, informing Baldwin and Melisande of her actions. King Baldwin agreed to oversee the transition of the Countess's territory to the Byzantines and take in her Frankish refugees. Left only with a castle at Roncalais, Jocelyn's widow Beatrice decided to sell this fortress too to the Armenian Catholicos Grigor III, before going into exile in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, never to return. On their way west, the Latin column was followed by Nur ad-Din's horsemen, who surrounded them at Aintab, barraging the Latins with arrows. The Frankish discipline prevailed, and King Baldwin managed to escort the Edessan refugees safely to Antiochian territory. Of course, the area the Byzantines bought was too remote for them to maintain, and it didn't take long before Nur ad-Din carved up the county with his Seljuk allies in Anatolia. Sultan Masud of Rum took Kaysun, Aintab and Duluk. The Artukids seized Samosata and Berejik, and Tebessel was taken by Nur ad-Din, marking the final death of the county of Edessa. In 1152, Nur ad-Din attacked the county of Tripoli, besieging the city of Tortosa and overwhelming its garrison. The capture of this vital harbour allowed Nur ad-Din to reach the Mediterranean Sea, and more crucially, cut the communication lines between Jerusalem and Tripoli with Antioch. Things were looking grim for Raymond, and it was only due to King Baldwin's support that they managed to assemble a strong enough force to retake Tortosa, only to find the city in ruins. To protect this vital town, both rulers placed the Knights Templar in charge of guarding Tortosa. Upon Raymond's return, another shakeup took place in Tripoli. Raymond's relations with his wife, Countess Odiana, had soured severely. Sources from the time don't state the exact reason. However, later 13th century writing recalls that Odiana had an affair with a French noble and troubadour named Geoffrey Rudel of Blaye, who reportedly died of sickness during his travel to Tripoli around the time of the Second Crusade. As the quarrels between Raymond and his wife were spiraling out of control, Melisande invited Odiana to Jerusalem in order to ease the tensions. At the same time, King Baldwin moved to Tripoli to strengthen its position against Nur ad-Din. As Raymond was escorting both ladies through the city of Tripoli, he was suddenly approached and murdered by the Nizari assassins. Though Melisande and Odiana called on the guards to chase the murderers, the assassins dispersed amongst the crowd and were never found. The motives behind Raymond II's death are sketchy, but the general consensus is that Countess Odiana was responsible. Acting swiftly, Odiana held an assembly in Tripoli, assuming regency over her son Raymond III, and asking the rulers of Jerusalem for protection, to which Baldwin and Melisande agreed. The lack of a single vision to oppose Zengid power became an increasing issue for the Kingdom of Jerusalem and its Latin allies. This was clearly seen in the growing animosity between Queen Melisande and her son Baldwin III. The queen intended to rebuild relations with Damascus, while her son preferred to ignore the Zengid threat in order to focus on possible territorial expansion into the weakening Fatimid state in Egypt. Another source of tension stemmed from the personal relations between both monarchs. As a 22-year-old, Baldwin wanted to rule on his own without his mother's interference. However, the queen had no desire to step down from her position of privilege. Melisande enfranchised her political allies from the House of Ibelin. The most influential of these allies was a king's constable, Manasses of Liège. Being favoured by the queen, Manasses' position was met by envy from some of Jerusalem's barons, such as Humphrey of Tauron and William of Falkenberg. These men conspired against the queen and her allies, influencing Baldwin into demanding that he be crowned as sole ruler of Jerusalem. Despite Patriarch Fulka calling for peace and the joint rulers' recognition, Baldwin continued to press his claim. Seeing no response from Melisande, Baldwin entered her quarters with his nobles, demanding to divide the kingdom in half. Melisande was shocked by her son's audacity and refused, after which a family quarrel ensued. After a long discussion and intervention by the clergy, it was settled that Baldwin would receive the north of the kingdom, consisting of Galilee and the coastal cities of Acre and Tyre. Moreover, his 16-year-old brother, Amalric, would hold the county of Jaffa, while Jerusalem and Nablus would remain under the Queen Mother's authority. Initially, all parties agreed and moved to their own domains. Yet the treaty had barely been ratified when Baldwin changed his mind about claiming Jerusalem for himself and demanded that Melisande give up her power. Having acquired most of the nobility to his side, King Baldwin first attacked Mirabel Castle, where Manasses resided. He forced the constable to surrender and banished him from the kingdom. After eliminating Manasses, the attackers moved on to Jerusalem. Realizing her support was shrinking substantially, the queen behind the citadel allowed King Baldwin to enter the city. Seeing that Melisande did not want to give up, the King of Jerusalem ordered his army to deploy siege engines and stormed the citadel several times. Realizing he could not take the citadel, Baldwin began talks with his mother, with Patriarch Fulka acting as a mediator. Queen Melisande eventually relinquished her crown and the city of Jerusalem in exchange for peace, to which Baldwin and his nobles agreed. As a result, Queen Melisande retired to her estates at Nablus, thus announcing Baldwin III to become the sole ruler of Jerusalem. The end of the civil war in Jerusalem marked the end of the kingdom's active policy in northern Syria. Baldwin realized that expansion to the north was now practically impossible. Instead, the King of Jerusalem wanted to focus on securing the Mediterranean coastline from the raids of the Fatimid fleets, which disrupted the pilgrims' travel route to the Holy Land. The harbour of Ashkelon was the last Fatimid foothold in the Holy Land, a prize that had been eagerly craved by the Kingdom of Jerusalem ever since its establishment in 1099. Taking the harbour looked more possible than ever, as the Fatimid Caliphate was undergoing political turmoil in its home territory of Egypt, as its Caliph al-Zafir was trying to break from the dependency of his vizier. King Baldwin III knew all too well that this opportunity could not slip from their grasp. First, the king ordered the House of Ibelin to fortify the castle of Gaza and strengthen its garrison, in order to cut Ashkelon from potential aid from the land. By the end of January 1153, Baldwin assembled the full might of Jerusalem, mustering an army joined by his brother Amalric, all the Latin lords of the land, knights of the temple and the Hospitallers. Together they followed a relic of the True Cross and jointly moved on the harbour. Despite the Fatimid internal disputes, the city itself was well prepared for a siege, with a huge garrison and considerable navy to oppose the Latins. To counter this, the Franks conscripted 20 pilgrim ships and galleys, commanded by Gerard of Sidon, but these were not enough to confront the Egyptian fleet, which could still supply the garrison through the sea route. In July, the Latins finally brought a vast plethora of siege machinery, including catapults, rams and siege towers, slowly approaching the city walls. One night the defenders attempted to make a salyout to burn the machinery. Although the attack proved successful, the fire that spread over the siege equipment burned so fiercely that it heated the thicker section of the walls, causing them to collapse. This sudden breach was exploited by Templar knights, who rushed through the gap, where they encountered fierce resistance. After a heavy melee in which they sustained intense losses, 40 Templars managed to rush into the city. In the midst of the chaos, the Fatimid troops had thought that the Templars had captured the city, but as the Egyptians regrouped, they realized that the Latin forces inside the city were much fewer than initially presumed, and eventually overwhelmed the attackers. The death of so many experienced knights had deterred Jerusalem's nobles from taking the city, but Baldwin managed to convince his men to continue the siege. On the 19th of August 1153, the intense bombardment of the city and dwindling rations forced the Muslims to surrender, on condition of being granted a safe journey back to Egypt, a condition which Baldwin III granted. The capture of Ashkelon proved a great achievement for King Baldwin and the future crusading movement, as now the entire coastline of the Holy Land was in Christian hands. Furthermore, the capture of the main Fatimid fortress allowed the Franks to attack Egypt in the future. Jerusalem's victory at Ashkelon did not change the overall balance of power on the main Syrian frontier, and would soon be overshadowed by the deeds of Nur ad-Din. Having neutralized Antioch with Tripoli and vanquished Edessa, no one stood between the Lord of Aleppo and the city of Damascus. Nur ad-Din's alliance with Nur was created temporarily in the face of attack from the Second Crusade. However, after Nur died in 1149, power in Damascus was transferred to Emir Magi ad-Din Abak. Magi was aware of Nur ad-Din's designs on his city, so he renewed his contact with Jerusalem and even agreed to pay tribute to the Franks. Having fresh memory of the Crusaders' assaults on their home city, the people of Damascus began to despise Magi for his pro-Christian policy and began to look for Nur ad-Din as their leader instead. Utilizing his support from among the Damascene people, Nur ad-Din began a game of psychological warfare with Magi. In 1151, he moved his army under the city walls, accusing Magi of exploiting, quote, the poor and the weak among the Damascenes for paying tribute to the Franks, and addressed Damascenes, asking them to aid him in the holy war against the Latins. Additionally, Nur ad-Din used the presence of Najm al-Din Ayyub, the father of Saladin, as an agitator against the emir's policy. This tactic was carefully put in motion for 2 years straight. Finally, emboldened by the idleness of Baldwin III and growing resentment of the Burid regime, the Emir of Aleppo decided to act. In March 1154, Nur ad-Din again marched with his army for Damascus, setting camp under the city walls as usual. On the 18th of April, Nur ad-Din instigated a skirmish near the eastern gate against the Damascene patrols in the area. Utilizing the confusion this caused, Nur ad-Din rushed with his elite Askar Seljuk warriors and moved under the gate, where a given signal allowed the rest of his army to enter the city. Upon seeing the arrival of Nur ad-Din, the citizens of Damascus welcomed him as a hero. Upon hearing the news, Magi panicked and fled Damascus, leaving the city in the hands of Nur ad-Din. After decades of careful planning, it was Nur ad-Din who managed to accomplish something that his father, Imad ad-Din Zengi, could only dream of. The takeover of Damascus by the Zengids had finally completed the creation of a united Muslim front in Syria and Jordan against the Latins. This front would inevitably push the Crusaders to the Mediterranean Sea, and it would take the loss of Jerusalem to Saladin 33 years later to spark the next crusade. So it was that the Second Crusade in the Levant had come to a close, remembered as an enormous loss of manpower and potential of the Christian world. However, the Second Crusade also took place in Pomerania, and even lasted on Christendom's other frontiers, such as the Iberian Peninsula. What happened during these ventures? Did the Crusaders manage to expand their faith, or humiliate themselves, like in the case of the Levant? We will talk about these events in our long video covering the Second Crusade, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos, join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.